Before this whole COVID thing happened, the Houston Museum of Natural Science would offer evenings in the summer for no admission fee after hours. So I took advantage of that and the smaller crowds to take some pictures. So now I'm going to take you on a tour through the museum. As you approach it, this is what the museum looks like. And you go through those doors right there, and it takes you into the entry hall. Now from here, you go through this door, and it takes you to the Hall of Paleontology. When you first round the corner, you will realize that they're taking you through what they picture to be the history of the world, starting from the beginning of life. This plaque is for what's called the Great Oxygen Event. It says that 2.2 billion years ago, sediments of iron rust formed in the earth. Those sediments, they say, indicate the beginning of oxygen on the earth. Before that, all you find are fossils like this, and this is a picture of a fossil in the museum. It's something that was called a stromatolite. Now, you may remember from the video that you watched in homework that there were these kind of nobule things coming up from the shallow seafloors. The fossils are found in quite a few places around the world. More recently, some of them have been dated at 3.43 billion years old. And again, it's supposed to be a time without oxygen. That complies with the Miller and Urey experiment that we were talking about. But in 1956, stromatolite were found living. These structures that had been fossilized were discovered in existence on the coast of Australia. Now, why hadn't they been discovered before in other places around the world? It's because they get eaten by snails as soon as they get exposed to the surface. So this just happened to be some the snails missed. Since we've got them here, now we can look at them in a little more detail and find out that they're actually cyanobacteria. What are cyanobacteria? It's like blue-green algae. This is pond scum. Don't look down on it because, after all, it represents 70 to 80% of the oxygen we have on the Earth today. Okay, if it represents that much of the percentage of oxygen that we have today, and they were around 3.43 billion years ago, then that means that there was a gap of 1,200,000,000 years where they were pumping out oxygen and it didn't have any impact on the Earth? I'm thinking there really wasn't an oxygen event. Here's what a cyanobacteria looks like. As you can see, it's not too simple, and yet it's supposed to be one of the earliest life forms. And inside this life form, we find the process of photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide is combined with water and sunlight to produce a simple sugar and oxygen. Now, in case that sounds too simple to you, here is one phase of that process. Since we've come to understand photosynthesis, we have also discovered that there are other bacteria capable of a process called chemosynthesis. They take the heat from volcanic sources and produce a sugar and have a residue of sulfur. And it's not too simple either. All organisms require food. Food is only produced by organisms. Therefore, the first organisms must have been complex enough to produce their own food, which means the first organisms were doing these complex processes. Here's an article published in 2006 where they looked into cyanobacteria's process of photosynthesis to understand origins better. The study turned up 1,054 proteins that are used in this process. Note at the bottom of this quote, despite its evolutionary, environmental, and geochemical importance, that means, despite the fact that they have every need to show that the environmental conditions and the fossil records support evolution, many aspects of cyanobacterial cell life remain obscure, which is code for we have not yet figured out how to make these factors justify evolution. Turn the corner in the museum and you'll come to the Cambrian explosion. It's called an explosion because of the sudden appearance of complex organisms like this one. This is a trilobite. It has a segmented body, armor, and eyes as complex as any insect today. The museum has thousands of these fossils because tens of thousands of species of trilobites exist all over the world, dated in the same levels of rock. We even find animals that ate them. There's a model of this Anomalocaris in the Museum of Natural Science in Houston. It's about 3 feet long. But remember, all of this has no fossil record between this and this. You might ask, well, those would be soft body animals, and they didn't leave any fossils. Here's a fossil of a Cambrian jellyfish. Somebody might say, but Maybe they had complex bodies and shells, but they were too small to be fossilized. Here's an article published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science about sponges 60 million years before the Cambrian period, the fossils of fossilized embryos. Here's what they look like under an electron microscope. No excuses for size. Now, to get a picture for what this means, let's put the geologic timeline on a 24-hour clock. Here you see that one-celled animals exist for all but the last 3 hours and 28 minutes. And within that 3 hours and 28 minutes, only 5 minutes and 31 seconds account for the period of the explosion of all these creatures. Now, you're familiar with the tree of life idea. Here's what we really see. 2.95 billion years of one-celled organisms, followed by 13 million years where 47 different multicellular body plans appeared suddenly. Today, we have 35 surviving body plans. Only one was added shortly after this period in the fossil record. That truly was a Cambrian explosion. Turn the corner again, and you come to the coelacanth. Coelacanth dates back to the Devonian period, which is 300 million years ago. It's before the first four-footed land animals were said to exist. Notice it has a fleshy tail, which could have evolved into a reptilian or amphibian tail. It had 4 fleshy fins, which are obviously the predecessors to 4 legs. Now, try to ignore that it also had fleshy fins that were not in the positions of legs. This creature is said to have walked in shallow coastal waters, that it evolved into the first land 4-footed animals, and it was thought to be extinct for millions of years. But then in 1938, a scientist on the east coast of Africa found one of them for sale in the fish market. We now know that hundreds of these things exist all along the Asian coast.
They show the coelacanth in its natural environment. As expected, they live in a fairly uninhabited ecosystem and seem to have no real predators. They aggregate during the day in volcanic caves, and at night have been known to migrate as deep as 700 meters. Most incredible of all, films of the coelacanth showed how the multiple fins function and laid to rest the idea of a crawling fish first put forward by J.L.B. Smith. Smith said they are creeping on the bottom, like seals, but of course they don't. They are not walking, they are continually hovering.
So, they have been found deeper than 2,000 feet. They never come above 300 feet deep, and they never use their fins to touch the bottom. Around the next bend, you will find this fossil. It's the fossilized bones of a large group of amphibians, all buried together. The plaque says that they were all adults, and that only their big bones were found. Well, this is attributed to current that washed all the small bones away after they died. So this must have been due to some kind of a flood. This is not news. 95% of all fossils were buried in a flood. Okay, now we get to the big stuff. They have some beautiful dinosaur skeletons in this museum. I highly encourage you to go take advantage of seeing these things. What I want to talk about here, though, particularly are their hip bones. The large lumbering dinosaurs typically had what we call an ornithischian hip, whereas your running dinosaurs typically had what we call a saurischian hip. The ornithischian hip was horizontal, and the leg bone came up from the bottom to meet it. The saurischian hip was more vertical, and the bone came in sideways to hit it. Dinosaurs basically fall into these two categories. Now, you may also know that many dinosaurs are now pictured with feathers. I don't know if feathers have actually been found with dinosaurs. However, I do know that the theory has long been that dinosaurs evolved into birds, and you see more and more drawings of them with feathers as if they're on their way to becoming birds. But I find it interesting that the saurischians, the ones with lizard hips, are the ones that are pictured as developing into birds. This is particularly strange because ornithischian means bird-hipped, and saurischian means lizard-hipped. Now, the difference is pretty clear if you look at the skeleton of a chicken. It has a bird-shaped hip. It's a bird. Charts will also show sometimes that both types of dinosaurs evolved from what they call thecodonts. Now, don't let charts like this fool you. Thecodonts are aphyletic. That means that they're not grouped together because they have common ancestors or relatives. It's because they have some feature that groups them together. Scientists know that the animals in this group cannot be related to each other. Here you have the saurischians, the lizard hips, and here you have the ornithischians, the bird hips. Today you do not see trees as much as you see cladograms. Cladogram does not attempt to show relation as much as it is intended to show similarity, but still it's assumed that birds came from reptiles. In this chart, you see the ornithischians, bird hips, go off in a different direction, and the saurischians go to become birds. We have come to the most important section of the museum, the Hall of Man. Notice there are no attempted lines to connect the ape-like skulls on the bottom with the human-like skulls on the top. They're just kind of scattered around in a general similarity kind of thing. Upper left are 4 human skulls that I want to bring to your attention in particular. The museum does not list these figures, but I want you to know that the Homo erectus had a cranial capacity of 900 cubic centimeters. The Homo heidelbergensis had a brain capacity of 1,220 cubic centimeters. The Homo sapien, that's you and me, has 1,500, and the Neanderthal has 1,800. So don't let brain size indicate anything to you about intelligence, or else we have to consider ourselves lower than Neanderthal. We, in fact, have Neanderthal DNA in us. If you do one of those 23andMe or some other DNA test, you may get back a test that says what percentage of Neanderthal you are. Notice these skulls of apes and supposed ape ancestors, the Australopithecus. The part that is actual bone that has been found is white. The part that is assumed to be the shape and structure is black. So I just want you to note how much is assumed from these parts. I think that's about all we're going to be able to cover today. We'll finish our tour next week.